listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your resource to better understand and execute successful podcast ad campaigns. Hello and welcome to the Podcast Advertising Playbook. I'm your host, Heather Osgood. Today I'm joined by Greg Glenday. He is the CEO of Acast. Greg, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Heather. Great to see you.
You've been on the show before, so you can officially call yourself a returning guest, which is very exciting.
Very excited.
But when we talked last time, you were in a different role. So now you are the relatively new CEO of Acast. How long has it been? A few months?
A few months, yeah, early June. So I've been on a bit of an internal listening tour, kind of bobbing and weaving throughout the Swedish and European vacations that people take. And it's been great. So it's been a lot of listening. And now September 1st, it's time to go. So it's been busy.
Yeah, I bet. What would you say has kind of really changed as you kind of approach this new chapter? Do you have like some specific goals in mind for the company?
I do. Yeah, it's a great question. The cool thing, and if I was coming in from the outside, I think that's a whole different story, fresh set of
Right.
eyes, look at everything. The good thing is I've been here 2.5 years as the chief business officer, which pretty much, I had about 75% of the company, call it 275 people in my org out of the 400. So really it's been about alignment. We're not completely changing much. We kind of lifted the tent and brought in product and engineering, finance, just getting everybody a little bit more aligned. We're a really fast growing 10-year-old company in an emerging industry. So there's a lot of things that, you try a lot of things and over time things change. So really I've spent the last 90 days really focused on alignment, which sounds really boring, but we have so many talented people in the company. If we could just all make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction, I think we can do a lot more. And we've been doing good work anyway. So that's been the theme, is just sort of getting everyone on the same page, rowing in the same direction, communicating a little bit differently. But otherwise, it's business as usual. Things are going really well, and we want to keep that momentum.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I have always really loved about Acast is I feel like you are so self-contained. You have all of the different elements, right? You've got the technology piece, so you can do all of the hosting. You've got the representation piece, so you're helping with that monetization.
Yep.
But you also have a production side of things as well. And you're working really close with the advertisers to help them with their creative. How does Acast really maybe differ from other companies because you are so all-inclusive?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I think that's a really, really great way to frame what we do. And I think if I was being honest, I could say Acast probably had a little bit of an identity crisis where we had a story and a narrative that, maybe we kind of describe ourselves one way. These are all true, but maybe we describe certain parts of our company to investors and certain part to creators and certain part to ad tech partners and certain parts to brand advertisers or marketing executives. And really what I've tried to do is like, let's get all that together so that we have an overarching narrative that, includes all these pieces. But, here's our story and here's what we do and here's why we're unique in the world. I want to be true to Acast, the sort of core DNA that we have, that's independence and being agnostic and really supporting the creators. And sticking to those guns, I think, is really, really a smart move for us. I think about our three constituents. It's the creators. So everything we do, the production, investments we make, how do we make their lives easier? How do we make it so they can make a living in podcasting so that more shows can make money and not just the top 50? So we really think about the creators as one constituent, and that's very authentic. We want real authenticity in those creators. The other constituent is their audience, which we really care about. How do we make sure that we're delivering these to them and we're being very respectful about ad loads and things like that, and making sure that we're not just flooding the zone with just as much advertising as possible. We want it to make sense. We want it to continue to work. And then our third constituent is the brands. So we have these three pillars, and then we have our product and tech people in the middle. And I just did a call with them, and it's like, hey, we want you guys, like this group of people in the middle, we want you to make it as easy as possible for our other constituents, the creators, the advertisers, and the audience. Like, let's make sure we're connecting the dots and making it easy for them to reach each other. And that's really as simple as it is. We think, the creators do the work. We give them as much support, production, research, insights, as much as we can. And then how do we make sure that they're having healthy shows, growing their audiences, and all those things. So I love the idea that we're this independent, agnostic, global. I think that's a really good place to be. We're not beholden to a platform. We don't have other side businesses that are more important
Hmm.
to us. This is what we do. So we
Right.
are, we're really focused, and, we're the only truly global network like that,
Hmm.
so.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, you bring up the idea that you are a global organization, and Acast was founded in Europe, and I would say 9 out of 10 times when I talk to a European podcaster, they'll say that they have been with Acast. So the roots really go deep within that space. But you certainly have a large presence here in the US. When you think about kind of what that next step looks in terms of growth for Acast, is it about really creating more presence within the US?
Yes, it's a funny topic because we were born in Stockholm. We really grew. The UK and Europe became very important to us. And then the US was always this kind of frontier for Acast that, like, hey, we should do that. And there's no reason the US should be fourth or fifth biggest country we have. Like, it seems like there's the most opportunity there. Let's get that to work. A couple of years ago, we started really getting it right in the US. And I think you may have seen our second quarter earnings. We said that North America, US became our largest market,
Hmm.
and that's ahead of schedule. I think nobody would have predicted early 2025 that that would happen. I think that's a good problem to have, but it also shows, like, one strategic thing at Acast is not every market's the same. So, our philosophy is going to be, we're going to have an amazing team of talented people in the middle with global
Hmm.
roles, but they're not going to run everything. They're going to kind of be a center of excellence, best practices. But if we've got call it a 60 share in the UK, and we're very dominant in podcasting in the UK, that's a different approach. That's defending a hill. How do we grow the whole space? How do we make podcasting better?
Hmm.
The US, much more competitive. Nobody has a dominant market share. So do we lean into that sort of global part of our business, which I love? And instead of treating our individual markets like franchises, we're much more collaborative now. A show like Tony and
Mm.
Ryan,
Hmm.
there's one of my favorite shows that we have, Tony and Ryan in Australia, two-person show. They do it 5 days a week, wildly popular, but 20% of their listening is elsewhere. It's in the US, it's in the UK. And for us to kind of knock down the borders for them and say, hey, that's not just waste. Like, we can actually monetize that for you. You have enough expats and Australians and people who found your show in the US that this is a real show, just
Hmm.
the US part. So I think we're starting to do more of that, where we're collaborating internationally when it makes sense, and we're localizing. The people in France is different than Germany, and we have to be able to provide, sort of different services for our
Hmm.
creators and audiences in markets that may be right next door to each other, but very different.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Well, and we have seen at True Native a really, really big push into US only targeting, which I think makes sense, right? Like, if you're a company that is just selling products to the US, especially if you're any sort of e-commerce company that's just shipping to the US, it makes sense that you would only want to target the US. And, if we reach back into that embedded ad read land where we sat for so long, where the ads were in all of the content distributed to everyone, there really wasn't that availability of doing the US targeting. And now that there is that availability, it's become a really highly demanded kind of method of targeting. And I think what we always look at is, gosh, there is this audience that is being kind of overlooked because it isn't being sold enough. So, I'm looking at it probably from almost the opposite perspective, but it's like, well, gosh, if we've got 20% of those downloads that are happening in the UK or Australia or Canada, and we're not monetizing them, I think there's a real loss there. And I could see the power of Acast being the ability to monetize impressions across countries and internationally, obviously.
absolutely, the demand comes from everywhere. And if
Hmm.
somebody just wants to focus on inside the US borders, great, we're happy to do that. And then we can monetize. We've got feet on the street, we've got, ways of doing business, whether it's self-serve, programmatic, or omni-channel. We can do all those things in every country. So I think it's whatever the customer's looking for, we want to be able to deliver that for them. And I think
Hmm.
if podcasting is going to grow up, we have to make it a little more sophisticated, and we have to sort of continue to develop the industry. And spending time with all these clients, like I do, you really hear the objections, and then those objections become your to-do list. They're telling you what the friction is. And they're like,
Hmm.
oh, if only it was this. It's like, well, let's go try and build that for you.
Hmm.
So that's where we can kind of surprise and delight partners, and say, hey, our product and engineering teams went to work on the laboratory on this problem that you said you had, and you said that if we could solve this, it would be easier to buy podcasting. Well, we solved it, so now it's time to pay the piper. That's the way we think about it, is just continue to evolve, make it easier, and take those objections and make them our roadmap in a way.
Sure. Yeah,
So
yeah. So, one of, I think, the hallmarks of the podcast industry is that we are always creating something new. There's always some change or some innovation that's happening. In your opinion, or from your perspective, what would you say is that next wave of innovation that we're looking at coming down?
I think it's going to all be around, and I'll put brand safety aside for now. I think it's all going to be around measurement. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's certain things that Acast can, that we can solve, and then there's other things that really it's best if it's a third party. No one's going to let us grade our own homework and say, tell the clients how big our shows are. So we really need to, help support partners that are looking to do that, because I think what makes podcasting amazing for brands is also what makes it really challenging, right? Like, it's not the most sophisticated of the digital media for data and passbacks and sophisticated targeting and measurement and how big is the actual audience. I think we all agree that downloads is not a very sophisticated measurement. Listens is
Yeah,
probably slightly better, but still doesn't really tell you a lot. And so we really want to think about the fabric of like the quality of a listen and how monetizable is that inventory? How do we think about
hmm,
how the industry grows and what's working? So I think it's just going to be that kind of more professionalism, and I think that's what the big blue chip brands are really looking for, is they just want to feel a little bit better that they're buying something. The same reason they sat on the sidelines for a long time with social, and then once the floodgates open, it becomes a pretty standard. The agencies start hiring people to do this, and so I think we're starting to see that. But everyone says podcasting is 20 years old. I mean, I think the word is 20 years old. Steve Jobs invented the word 20 years ago, but the industry, I use the analogy, it's like when the earth cooled, it was like there was like 2.8 billion years where nothing really happened. It was just sort of primordial soup. And I think that was podcasting for a while. Then the next 10, Acast is 10 years old, but the last 2 years, it's really started to mature into
right.
like, okay, this is a real industry. We got to take this seriously. There's a lot of money changing hands. People are making a living. So
Right.
it's growing up, which I think it's disappointing. Some people love that sort of entrepreneurial spirit, and I want us to keep that. But
Sure.
it's definitely time to take that next step for the industry, I think.
Right,
So
right. You just made so many good points. I love this idea that we say, oh, podcasting started in 2004. And it's like, okay, well, there were three people in a basement in 2004 recording a podcast. Like, I don't know.
yes.
Yes, like you said, like, yes, maybe that's when the word was invented, but it certainly has taken, I mean, I would venture to say at least 10 years to have gotten it to a place where it really turned the corner to being a real industry. And yeah, I mean, I've had many conversations with people who have been in the industry since 2004. And, certainly there is this thought that it was created to be very, very organic and very independent. And, we could share our voices and our thoughts. And like the whole point wasn't
Yeah.
monetization. But at the end of the day, as much as we all love what we're doing, we do need to be paid in order to live, right? That's just kind of the whole point of
Yeah.
the the independent economy too. And so I think that really, in my opinion, if we can look at that monetization piece and really focus on where there's so much potential there. And I love the point that we have to show up at a certain level of professionalism to these bigger buyers because they're used to a level of sophistication. And if we're not able to meet them where they're at, then they are not taking us seriously. And I guess one of the questions that I do have for you is I feel like since we've been moving into more of this video YouTube space that everybody's talking so much about, one of the pushbacks that we get from buyers is, well, we can't pixel track, video. And so we're not as interested interested in video as we are in audio because we can pixel track that. And I guess I have really looked at like the pixel as being a real kind of savior in some ways for the industry. I know that there's more beyond obviously the pixel, but where do you feel like the pixel kind of lines up with our ability to really prove measurement?
I think it's crucial, but the bigger elephant in the room is like the video conversation, which comes up pretty much every conversation. It's a portion of it, and
Sure.
I think it probably has a share of conversation that's higher than it probably deserves. I think it's a problem
1000%.
to yeah, I think it's a problem to solve for the industry. We have a lot of creators that ask us about it. What's our point of view? I think there will be a long form audio industry that has value. And I think what makes podcasting special, there's a lot of things, but it's sort of it's a meritocracy. We don't care how you get there. We send your show to hundreds of podcast players. Some of them are tiny, some of them are Apple or Spotify. People have lots of ways to consume the feed, but it's a meritocracy. The creator has to earn that relationship. There's no network executive that's going to green light it and put it on at 8 p.m. on Thursday. It's like you've got to earn and continuously earn that relationship with your audience. You've got to put the work in and all that stuff. So,
Hmm.
so we don't want to lose that because that doesn't really exist on the video side. These are more curated platforms. Some of them have algorithms. It's a different approach. The other thing we think about as our creators is video a must have. I think if you have a show that is dependent on video and it can't be listened to without watching it, it may not be a podcast. That may be
Agreed.
something altogether different. If it's optional, like your show, like any of these, if it's a conversation that if possible, it's enhanced with video, but it's not mandatory that you can still do it. To me, that's the holy grail. And I think that's where a lot of our creators sit, where they have a
Hmm.
show. If it's a 2 hour show, there may be a couple of moments that you would want to see, but you don't have to.
Hmm.
And, I think that's where the vast majority is going to go. So we're thinking about video as part of our omni-channel offering, and
Hmm.
we think you should have, if it makes sense for your show, you should be able to distribute in video. You should be able to promote in social. If you do live events, we're happy to help with those. So we think about it as maybe audio is the core, but however you reach your audience, Acast is going to help you with it and help you monetize it.
Hmm.
So we think that's a pretty clear way for a very muddy problem. That's a pretty clear way forward. And I think you're right. The pixel, like it's funny, there's different data you get back from hosting, but there's different data you get back from video than you do from audio, and it depends who you're selling it to.
Right.
I've lots of examples of. I don't think we're ever going to sell to the tried and true video teams that do like connected TV and do. I think where we're going to wind up is selling to the influencer teams, to the teams that maybe do brand direct that go beyond, and certainly audio. So
Hmm.
where we struggle sometimes, you probably run into this, where an audio buyer will say, I'm not allowed to buy video. I buy audio.
Right.
So are we going to split these out into two buys? So that's something that we just have to sort out with the industry. And we've seen it before. Again, the pattern recognition we were talking about
Hmm.
earlier, we've seen this with social where the buyers didn't know who's supposed to do this, how do we do it, who's in charge of this, who is the customer, and
Hmm.
that's become a mature part of the ecosystem. And same thing will happen here. So we just want to make it easy.
So, one of the things that really stands out to me about you is that you have a deep history in media and you have a passion for podcasts, and you've certainly been in the podcast industry and audio industry for many years. But I think you've got a bigger overall picture of the media industry, and you are part of the ad council. You're on the board there, and one of the things that we talk about in the industry sometimes is that podcasting has a bit of a PR problem. And what we mean by that when we say that is that there are these large, agencies and large media buyers that are not even considering podcasts because podcasts still just really aren't on their radar. Or, as you mentioned, maybe they're like, maybe we're looked at as being like, the ugly step kid or something, right? Where we don't always have that seat at the table. And I was curious in your work with the ad council, how are you seeing podcasts being perceived?
That's a really great question. I'm glad you brought up the Ad Council because I think, I spent my first years, we've talked about this. I went to every podcast event there is, and I think there's a lot of smart people in the industry, but we're talking to ourselves a lot, and I
Hmm.
think if you go from, all this great work being done to the larger media ecosystem where Nobody's talking about podcasting. They all have opinions about it, but nobody's talking about it. And I think there's lots of excuses. We don't make it easy to be a podcast buyer, right? And there's lots of reasons to say, oh, brand safety, it's difficult. How do I do that? Who do I work with? Everyone's a little different. You guys are, it's clunky, all of these things. So the reason that I participate in the ad council is, and you're right, my career is like, I've been audio adjacent, but I also, no one would plan a career like mine. I've been in an ad network, a premium ad network in digital. I've been in an out of home company, digital out of home company, video out of home, audio, live events. And then, just some sort of unique go to market things like Shazam, where it's like, it's a one of a kind company. So that's kind of what attracted me to podcasting was I saw the value for brands and how authentic it is. So the reason that I'm on the ad council is one, we want to do some good things in the world. And the ad council's been around over 100 years and they've really made the world a better place. They tackle these incredibly difficult issues and they use the power of advertising. I think, advertising doesn't have the best reputation of being like good for the world, right? It's like it's a corporate commoditized capitalistic thing. But if we can take this one org where like everyone volunteers their time and their ad impressions, and you see these big companies putting their money and their time where their mouth is. So one, truly, I love that. And I actually think they're tackling such complex problems that podcasting is a great way to solve that. Like we can unpack things like opioids or gun safety and things like that. We can unpack them in podcast on a podcast better than you can in any other medium. So I think
Hmm.
we belong there to help them, but then also that's where the CMOs are. And for me to be able to listen to them and hear that they're all struggling with how do they reach authentic audiences, how do they all these things that we already have. So it's
Hmm.
about, we know that podcasting has this. How do I connect what we have with what they are looking for? So I'm really there to tell the story of podcasting, not just Acast, because I think, we want to elevate the whole industry, but there's no reason that these blue chip clients should not be participating in podcasting the way some of our wonderful direct response and attribution clients do. If we can sell subscriptions, we can raise brand awareness for an automotive company or a wireless company or a pharmaceutical company for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for your work there. I'm glad that you're doing it. And I think that it's helpful for the industry. And, I'm sure many people listening to this podcast have heard about the merge between Sounds Profitable and Podcast Movement. And I know Brian Barletta in particular, like that has been, kind of his resounding message for a long time is that as an industry, we all do kind of like to get into a room and talk about how great we are because it's a lot of fun, if I'm being honest. But it would be really amazing if we could get into other rooms and tell other people how great we are. So when you think about, maybe hesitation that a brand might have in coming to podcast advertising, I know you obviously mentioned measurement as being a new innovation. What would you say is your advice to a brand in really creating an effective strategy?
Yeah, I would say don't overthink it. Try it. I think there's so many things that get overblown, like the amount of brand safety conversations that we had.
Hmm.
Like, how do we make sure? And, what I want to tell people, it's like the old radio days where like I used to sell Howard Stern and then I sold against Howard Stern. And we would say to people, if someone's tuning in and listening, they are not offended. I think that argument made sense in radio, but still radio is one to many. It's broadcast. So I can see the argument. In podcasting, most of the time, it's a one-to-one medium. It's sought, not served. It's not an algorithm. So I think I would
Hmm.
say just understand it. You're going to be communicating your message to an audience that is receptive. They've sought out that content. They've taken the time to put in their ears. They're probably paying attention, and it's going to work. So measure us. Give us a chance. And I would say don't just buy podcasts, buy podcasting, because I think that's a small nuance, but I think it's really important to unpack that the industry to date in the last couple of years, most clients, they pick a few shows or they get recommendations and they call us up and they want to know, they want to buy something specifically. We want to buy
Hmm.
these 5 shows, and we very politely try and guide them. We will sell you those shows. But really what you want is their audience. You don't necessarily want that show, you want the audience.
Hmm.
So what we want to be able to provide to them is make it really easy for, like, one of our big shows is called Giggly Squad. You probably know, they're wonderful. They do a great job. We get a lot of incoming demand. But when people come in, we say, we're going to do the deep dive with Giggly Squad, but we have another 50 shows that target a similar demographic. You could
Mhm.
make this campaign larger, reach more people. And I actually think the response rates and the appreciation from listeners, the more niche it is, I think the more responsive the listener is. Because I
Mhm.
know if I've got a niche hobby like collecting seashells and I'm listening to a podcast about collecting seashells, and all of a sudden BMW is there with a really thoughtful ad around that. I'm like, oh wow, like they're supporting this is a niche show that I love, and they're helping keep it, delivering it to me for free. So I would say jump in, try it, measure us. I think I speak for the whole industry when I say we work as well as anything I've ever seen from just a driving results for clients. And I don't understand why you wouldn't want to be somewhere. It's hard to find places where you can have effective ad campaigns in 2025. And we've got a new one that is under monetized. This seems like a place where a big brand could literally dominate the share of voice and build their brand. So, yeah, I'm very passionate
Mhm.
about that topic, as you can
Mhm.
tell.
Mhm.
So,
I love that you said that because I feel like we experience the exact same things all the time. And
yeah,
what I tell advertisers is that number one, your first campaign needs to be a testing ground, right? If you're going to run a campaign, you can't run that first campaign and knock it out of the park. Like, yes, of course, we would love for that to happen. And sometimes it does happen. But really, when you start that first campaign, it needs to be really a testing ground of saying what's going to work and what's not going to work. And when buyers come in with a really focused idea that they just want to advertise on these specific shows, it doesn't really allow them to experience all that podcasting, as you said, has to offer, right? And really being able to go outside and look at that targeting your audience concept as opposed to just targeting content, which I think that, that happens a lot, which I don't really believe is as effective as it should be. So it's great to hear that that we're on the same page with that. There's so much power in the overall results that the medium can create, but you have to approach it, I think, in the right way for it to give you the results that you're looking for.
yeah. Well, I think change is hard, and this is a new
Sure.
thing for consumers. Figure it out because it's entertaining. They're going to do it, but it's a new thing for brands and advertisers and agencies. And the holdcos are changing, and the creative agencies are changing. Radio spots don't sound good in podcasts. So
Yeah.
it's a new thing, and change is hard. And we've got to show the value, and it can be frustrating because it's not happening as fast as we'd like. But quality usually wins, and we know this stuff works, and these messages work, and people hear them. It's just people are trying to put it into an old container. Like these shows need to be greenlit by an executive and then they get, or that's not the way it is. It's a meritocracy. You earn the listening every day.
Right.
How many times have we seen an athlete or a musician or somebody famous starts a podcast because they feel like they're interesting, and it's not easy. They do
Right.
6 episodes and they're out of interesting stories. So
Right. Right.
it's the consistency is hard. I'm sure, thinking about the guests and how you do it. It's work to engage your audience. So yeah,
Yeah.
it will
Yeah,
take
for
some
sure.
time.
Yeah. So I know that we kind of talked about innovation, but if you were to look 3 to 5 years ahead at the industry, where do you expect that we'll be?
I think we will be a main. I think we should seriously overtake traditional audio, sort of broadcast as a
Hmm.
very unique thing. If I had my way, I think the industry will continue, the quality of the podcasts will increase. I think there's a lot of news around like total podcast hours and all that stuff. I don't think that matters. I think around the fringes, the small shows, the hobbyists and things, those will come and go, but it's kind of cool that once in a while something will spring out of there and
Hmm.
become, I think that's amazing. And I think we will become a mainstream part of media plans. I think it's a really influential platform. I think we'll probably be part of what's becoming this sort of influencer economy.
Hmm.
Creator economy is one thing. I think influencers get a bad rap because it's like, we're not creating a scene in the middle of Times Square to get some views. That's not clicks. That's not what I'm talking about. But it's like long form engagement and real engagement over time with an
Mhm.
audience has value. So I think we'll become a mainstream part of all the media plans. They'll start with on demand audio, podcasting within influencer campaigns. And I think it'll be, I think you're going to see double digit growth for the besting industry for,
Mhm.
I hope at least the next 10 years.
Yeah, yeah, I
So,
agree. I wish that we could do a study, and maybe somebody has, and I'm just unaware, but the time spent with podcasts is off the charts. And to me, when we constantly talk about our lack of attention span and we
yeah,
look at all of these TikTok, YouTube shorts, all of these, right? I know at least I watch my kids and I'm like, whew, their attention span. My attention span's certainly not as good as it used to be. Their attention span's not great either.
very
But
true.
people spend so much time with podcasts. And when we take shows like The Diary of a CEO and the Joe Rogan podcast, where they are producing, I regularly listen to Diary of a CEO for probably 5 hours a week. I mean,
Mhm.
I listen to it while I'm doing all kinds of different activities, right? I'm not just sitting and listening to it. But I do think that time spent listening with podcasts is so high. And we're seeing, I would say, an increase in these long form content podcasts. And yet we're seeing a decrease in attention span on other platforms. And so I see that as really, that there's so much power there. And the influence that Stephen Bartlett has right now is so high, and it's because of podcasts. And it sounds like that's
Mhm.
kind of what you believe as well.
Yeah, like I said, the brand's really at the core. They're renting the relationship that that creator
Hmm.
has with the audience. And, you're trying to get a little of that magic from a host that has a highly engaged audience. And does some of that dust sprinkle over onto your brand where people have a good sentiment, feel good about your brand because they're so, this is the only industry. I may have said this to you when we first spoke a couple of years ago. This is the only industry where I was thinking about it and I was on the outside of podcasting and I
Hmm.
could name all of the big advertisers in podcasting. Like I could name them. And I wasn't
So
just
fascinating. You're
if you
right.
were if someone were to ask you about CTV, which is also a fast growing, can you tell me who? I mean, maybe a
Progressive?
maybe a progressive, maybe Liberty, maybe a couple of pharmaceutical companies you
Yeah.
could think of, a couple of drugs that you might be aware of, but nobody could rattle off BetterHelp, Athletic Greens. Anyone I interview or talk to, they can all tell you the commercials they've heard. And I know
Yeah.
what they listen to based on what they tell me. If they say DraftKings, I know what they're listening to. If they say BetterHelp, I know what they're
True.
listening to. I think you're absolutely right. You've nailed it. And I think that will continue because that's why I always use the word authenticity, because that's what they're,
Mhm.
you know, it's one thing to put your ad in amongst the low attention span kind of TikTok and all this stuff. And it's like, the stuff that's giving you the dopamine hits. And then podcasting, when I put these in, I'm the same way. Like I'll commute, I'll do all my stuff, I'll be in social and LinkedIn and Instagram and all that. And then when it's time to walk the dog or it's time to go, like, this is kind of the way people used to unwind with a book or unwind with,
Mhm.
just kind of sitting like, okay, I'm going to watch a documentary or that's what this is. And
Mhm.
this didn't used to be a place that used to be off limits to advertisers. So we want to
Right.
be thoughtful about it. We're never going to do 20 minutes of commercials an hour.
Right.
But if we're thoughtful about it, this is a new place for brands to respectfully participate in that kind of longer form
Mhm.
till again, Taylor Swift, like she could have announced her engagement on Instagram, and 5 years ago she would have. The fact
Right.
that she wanted to unpack and tell the story is like that's a good lesson for brands. Well, your brand probably has a story beyond just what does the car look like,
Right.
so I think there's plenty for the short attention span people, and then we're going to be in the more sophisticated, longer
Yes.
attention span, unwinding, unpacking. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah, I
Well,
love
we'll
that
just
observation. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. We'll just plan to meet in 10 years and see if your prediction was right, Greg, because I
that's
think
right.
it's right. And it's my prediction too. So let's just hope we're both on track.
Let's make it so. We can. I'll try from my side to make it happen. You try from your side. And
Perfect. Perfect.
yes.
Yeah. Well, Greg, thanks so much for being on the show. If someone's interested in working with Acast, where's a good place for them to go?
I would say start with me and I will get you to the expert. The beauty at Acast is most of the people we try and hire are better than us and they're experts in their field. So my email is gg@acast. So feel free. If you're hearing this, you're in our sphere anyway. So yeah, let us know how we can help.
Thank you. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Heather. Have a good one. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you have enjoyed this interview with Greg. I know that I got a lot out of the conversation. And if you are interested in finding out how you can capitalize on the engagement of podcasts with podcast advertising, reach out to us at True Native Media. You can head over to our website or you can email us at info@truenativemedia.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you again the next time. Thank you for listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your source to a better understanding of the podcast advertising industry.